So as we have just discussed, we started our discussion of pricing path dependent options on Wednesday. We have already understood how Bermudian options can be evaluated using two things. One is the adjustment of the grid, and the other is this evaluation algorithm, where at each of the grid points, I make the choice of continuing or immediate exercise. So now let us use this same idea and try to value American options. We know that American option actually allows the holder to exercise at any point of time during the life. So in theory, the value of the American option is given by this expression here, where this value, given the strike price and the timeline, etc., at any time point small t within the lifetime of the contract, will be given by the supremum of all these expectations. Supremum over the whole remaining time. Because starting at time small t, I can exercise at any instant. In theory, I can exercise any instant of time up to and including capital T. And where I should be stopping, that discussion we have already had last term. We defined what is a stopping time, tau. If you remember what happened last term, as a continuation of our binomial model discussion, we also talked about the stopping time distribution calculations. And using those stopping time ideas, American option prices were theoretically determined. We had a well-defined way of computing. Of course, there is no closed form solution, but we could show that the process is well-defined. Is that okay? Do you all remember last term? So how do I interpret the silence?
It is okay.
Good. Okay. So now that we are in the finite world, we are going to talk about computation. So we are going to talk about finite discrete time operations only. We cannot theoretically evaluate this American option in numbers. This is not numerically possible. So what we do is the following. So there are some references here which shows that, and it is not very difficult to show actually, that for each time point t, there will exist a critical stock price S star, so that if the stock price is below S star at any point of time, then a put option will be exercised immediately. Which means the value of the American put option will be the value of immediate exercise, which will be K minus S. Whereas if the stock price is above S star T, we will continue with the contract. We will not exercise. Continuation will be better. So the value of the contract will exceed the immediate exercise. So basically, for each time point, I can slice the stock price line into two parts. One part is for continuation and the other part is for immediate exercise. For a put option, exercise interval will be to the left and the continuation interval will be to the right. For a call option, exactly the reverse will happen. So this is what is formally defined in this set. The C is the continuation set. So pair ST, all S such that it is greater than S star T. So this is the continuation region. So S star T upwards is my continuation region where I would like to hold on to the put option. The complement is called capital E, which is the less than equal to, and that is the exercise region where using the put option immediately is the better option. So we already know that this set is well defined for each time point. Okay. Intuitively, it is very simple, but of course, it requires a formal proof, and that proof indirectly we have discussed last term using the stopping time argument. Maybe not in full generality, but at least for our limited setup. So that is fine.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So I have the continuation and exercise regions defined for each time point t. And while the value in the exercise region is known, it is clearly known because it's k minus st for put. We need to determine the value in the continuation region, because in the continuation region is where I have to do more calculations. Continuation means I am basically looking at expected payoff for holding on to the option. So that will require more calculation. How is it done in computational work? In general, the technique used to price American option via this PD type of techniques, because after all, it involves a PD. They are based on the Bermudan option idea. They are actually based on the Bermudan option idea, where we consider only a discrete set of exercise time points. Obviously, I cannot consider an infinite set in any computational algorithm. So what we will do is we will approximate the American option by a Bermudan type arrangement. So this is what is written here. So in general, the technique used to price are based on the pricing of Bermudan option, where you evaluate the PDE involved in the American option on successive time slices of the grid and apply corrections of the optimal exercise. Correction means an algorithm of this type, where I will replace value points which are less than exercise value. So I take the bigger of the two. So let us see how it is going to work. It's not a complicated algorithm because it uses the Bermudan idea. So this is the Bermudan approximation. So this is the simplest method, the most basic method for pricing American options. So what we use is, again, the finite difference to solve the option price at the next time slice. Next time slice means previous tau. And then we apply the optimal exercise criterion, like here in this algorithm. So because if I discretize an American option, it will be like a Bermudan option. It will look exactly like a Bermudan option. So the calculation algorithm will remain unchanged. And I can determine the true option price. So given the next time slice value, I can come one step back, determine the true option price. And so we do it for each time step. Obviously, I'm moving from right to left because tau is reversed. So we do this at every time step, and we try to make the time step delta tau as small as possible. Why do I want to make it small? Because if my time grid is very coarse, then my approximation will not be good. Because after all, between any two grid points, I can still exercise my American option in theory. So I am ignoring all those exercise opportunities. So I want to make the grid as small as possible, as tight as possible. And if I can do that, then the result of the Bermudan option price calculator, the algorithm we discussed earlier, will actually converge to the American option price calculator. Is the argument clear? That this is our first attempt at evaluating American options numerically, and we do so using the Bermudan option idea. And then we try to argue that if we can make the grid, the time grid, very fine, then my approximation would be good.
So can we go above?
Yeah, of course. So
Sir,
you
does not,
want me to
sir,
come
the
here?
equation, sir, the equation will involve e to the power minus r tau minus t, not t capital T minus t, I think.
It will involve e to the power minus r tau. So t minus t
Tau.
tau.
Yes.
See, there was a notation confusion in this equation. So because the supremum is also done over tau. See now, so if I think of the Bermudan, we use tau precisely as t minus t. But here, this tau is just a running variable, so there was a little bit of confusion. So that's why I think t minus t was written here, so that we can remember what is the meaning of these symbols.
Okay.
But yes, so for us in the computational algorithm, tau is the reverse of t, so t minus capital T minus t. So I come from the right to the left. And I use the Bermudan idea to approximate American option. That is the first attempt. But then we know that there will certainly be some error involved in this process, some discretization error. So in particular, I will discuss two of these correction techniques for American option. So these two correction techniques, one of them is called the synthetic dividend method. So Black-Scholes PDE with a synthetic dividend process. And the other one is the Brennan-Schwarz algorithm. So Brennan-Schwarz is purely empirical, purely computational strategy, but the synthetic dividend method is more intuitive. So let us talk about these two. So we have all understood how the Bermudan approximation works for American option, but it may not work very well because of the approximation error involved. So now our attempt will be to improve that approximation in some way. The first strategy that we talk about is the synthetic dividend process correction. Okay, so here goes. So while we know that the Bermudan approximation will approximate the American option if we can make delta tau small enough, the computational burden will actually increase, because at every time slice, we have to evaluate things twice. Because first we evaluate the usual VK vectors, and then we again compare it with the exercise values and replace some of the VK elements by the exercise value, whichever is larger. Of course, now that we know the shape of the continuation region, we know that for a put option, once I start replacing, then for all stock prices below that point, I will also keep replacing. So basically the V vector will change from some point downward. Okay, is that clear? Because of the structure of the continuation region, these two are two intervals. Can you just think about it and let me know that this is clear to you, that my exercise region being of this type, if I start evaluating any vertical slice from the top, then it will be like continuation up to a certain point. And then once I start exercising, then it will go on doing exercise further and further below. So once I start replacing the V element by the exercise value, I will be substituting for all subsequent values below. So if I am here, if I am on this vertical, and suppose this point happens to be my S star T, then all points below will be replaced by the exercise value, and all points above will remain as it is. Okay? Does it make sense?
Yes, sir.
So because the American option structure we have already understood and it is quite simple. So I make a partition, everything above will remain the same, everything below will change for a put option. So coming back to the synthetic dividend correction. So I know that this is how the substitution will work, but I still have to do it. So I have to process every time slice twice. So it is a bit expensive, and after all, there will be approximations involved. So an alternative approach, which is called the synthetic dividend approach, is to modify the underlying PD. See, again, I am only working at discrete time point because I am in a numerical world. Now, instead of evaluating the values and then making changes, what we do is we modify the PD at those points directly. The PD itself is changed to take account of the optimal exercise condition. So what will happen is at each of the points on the grid, my PD becomes exactly accurate, theoretically accurate. So let me describe the process and then what I am talking about will be clear. So this is my original PD. So this is my differential operator, the generalized Black-Scholes PD given by this equation equal to this equal to 0. This we all know. This will work exactly for the European option, but for the American option, I have to do something more. Now, in the continuation region, where the holder is not exercising, and my original Black-Scholes PD holds, then actually this LV will be equal to 0. So when I am actually in the continuation region, then this LV is actually 0. So I don't have to do anything to the PD. But in the exercise region, this PD no longer holds because I am actually going to exercise, which means this is not giving me the optimal decision. For a European option, this gives me the optimal decision at all times, but not so for a put option, any American option in the exercise region, which means in the exercise region, this LV is not equal to 0. So what is the difference? That means the holder will exercise and the holder will get this amount, K minus X. So the value must be K minus S in the exercise region. Instead of whatever value this PD will give me, that must be inferior. This must be better, K minus S. Correct? If I indeed exercise, that means I must be getting more. That means the value given by LV equal to 0 is less than K minus S.
Yes, sir.
So what do I do? This is a very simple function, and I can immediately calculate the derivatives involved in this equation. So this del V del tau, del V del S, and del 2V del S square, these three for this particular functional form is easily computable. So what I do is I substitute these in the original differential operator. So in the original differential operator, if I substitute this del V del tau, del 2V, and del V del S by 0, -1, and 0, what I will get is QS minus R2. Okay, can you all check this? I am just
Yes, sir, it's all right.
substituting this one by -1 here. Everything else goes through. And V will be K. So it will be QS minus RK. So my LV is actually QS minus RK for the exercise region. So therefore, I can simply say that for the entire region, this operator holds. Am I right? I say that for the entire region,
Yes, sir.
this holds exactly.
Yes, sir.
So this is my synthetic dividend process. Why do I call it synthetic dividend? Because this term here is like an artificial dividend process. Why is this dividend coming? This dividend is coming because when I'm in the exercise region is less than S star T, I have an additional freedom. I have an additional choice of immediate exercise, which is beneficial for me. So how much extra am I getting? The extra I am getting is whatever I get from the original PDE, from the difference between K minus S and the value I get from the original PDE. So it is like a dividend for this additional choice. So the synthetic dividend is also demonstrated in this paper, Carr, Jarrow, and Maineni. So it's a very well-known paper. So what one do is one must extract from the American option holder. So I take something from the holder and give them something back. So what I do is we extract from the American option holder the interest on the strike, less the dividend yield for the time the stock spends in the exercise region. So what happens is, if I exercise, I get the money. So I can earn interest on that money. What I give up the stock. So whatever dividends may have come later, I give up on that. But in the exercise region, the interest earned on the strike is more valuable to me than the lost dividends. And that is what this expression actually means. This is the additional advantage in the exercise region, that I exercise my put option. So I sell off my share, I get the cash, and the interest earned on the cash happens to be better than the foregone dividend because the stock price is low enough. I am in the exercise region means the stock price is low. So is this clear, or should we go over this once more?
So this is clear, but how can we apply it in the computational paradigm?
In the computational paradigm, we will apply it only on each grid point. On each grid point, we will apply it. So my differential operator actually in effect will become a difference operator. This difference operator will be solved.
Oh, so we'll make a new difference operator that will accommodate this extra term.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that is exactly right. Because we are doing this discussion in the continuous time mode using the differential operator and the correction here. But what will we do in a computational setting? For a computer, it will have to be a finite grid. So my original generalized Black-Scholes PDE will have to be translated into a difference operator, as we have done already. We have seen this happen in the earlier sections, correct? Only now my difference operator will not be exactly according to this one, but it will be according to this new one. So for each time point for lower stock prices, my differential operator will have this additional adjustment term. And that will accommodate the American option corrections on that grid. So let me maybe just do the recap, because there are different pieces that we are using here. The first piece that we are using is actually how to handle the Black-Scholes PD. So our canonical setup, the generalized Black-Scholes PD was here in section 4.1, the same thing as we are discussing now. That Black-Scholes PD, we reverse the time, so writing tau in place of t, so a little bit of change. Then we did the grid operation, discretization, to come to this new equation here, which is the difference equation representing the Black-Scholes PD. And then we do some simplifications and make it look simpler and write it in the matrix form. That's a matter of detail. But what we are actually achieving is this difference equation here. That is my Black-Scholes PD, and that is enough for European options. Now let me go to the American situation. In the American situation, because I have to allow for this exercise at any time, what happens is we have to modify the differential operator. How is the modification done? This modification is done in the exercise region. In the exercise region, because these derivatives are very simple to evaluate, we can very easily modify the differential operator. This differential operator holds for the entire region. Now again, we go back to the difference operator work, use the usual backward or forward difference, central difference, etc., to approximate this differential equation as a difference equation. That is what will be involved in numerical evaluation of this synthetic dividend idea. So is this okay?
Yes, sir.
So I am using two things together. So if you recall those two things, the original Black-Scholes PD and the continuation and exercise region idea, then it's not very complicated. So it's basically adding like two subroutines to write a new program. Both the subroutines are known already. So that's our first idea. So we are talking about two. So first one is the synthetic dividend, which we just discussed. The other one is a purely empirical strategy, the Brennan-Schwarz algorithm. Brennan-Schwarz algorithm is actually also used in other statistical work, because it is also used in time series analysis. But anyway, so let me talk about Brennan-Schwarz algorithm in the finance context. So what do we do in the Brennan-Schwarz algorithm? This algorithm allows us to solve this tridiagonal matrix, this original matrix that we work with. We are in the implicit equation scheme. This allows us to solve this matrix system either bottom up, so starting to solve from the bottom, or top down, starting to solve from the top. Because it's tridiagonal, I have to do one of these things. But I can also make a choice depending on where our exercise region is expected to be. So suppose at any time step, my exercise region is close to the top, and in some other time slice, my exercise region is close to the bottom. Sorry, I am not making sense. I'm saying that the critical boundary is close to the top or the critical boundary is close to the bottom. Then I may want to work with different strategies here, bottom up and top down. So let me elaborate. So this is our scheme, and we can either solve from the top or from the bottom. We have the choice. But if we know where our exercise region is, where I have to make the corrections, in exercise region, I have to make the corrections. So then I will start solving from that side, because that will prevent propagation of incorrect exercise errors. So the closer I start from a point, the better will the approximation be. So it is known that we can solve this system by either first making the upper diagonal 0 and then solving the system, or first making the lower diagonal 0 and then solving the system. So that is the top down and bottom up approaches. If I had a regular system, it would not make a difference. Whatever I do, I will get same results. However, the Brennan-Schwarz algorithm actually makes it depend on the contract. So when we are solving the system, while we are solving the system, we also want to apply the optimal exercise criteria. So we begin, we want to begin closer to the exercise region. So in a simple setting, if I am looking at a put option, I know that the exercise region is where stock price is low. So the lower rows are in the exercise region, lower rows of the matrix. Okay, so if I have this put option, American put, we first make the upper diagonal 0 and then solve. And for call options, we will make the lower diagonal 0 and then solve. So the Brennan-Schwarz algorithm works like this, and they argue that this will actually help us to manage errors better. So the error propagation will be less through this approach, once we know which kind of option we are handling, put or call. Questions? Yes. Questions at this point? So we are looking at this choice of solution direction, and I am saying that the Brennan-Schwarz algorithm actually looks at the nature of the contract and then starts accordingly, and that they claim and they show that it will actually reduce the propagation of error. Okay, so if there are any quick questions now, I'll take them, or we'll take a break at this point. This concludes our discussion with the American options. And in the second period, we will talk about barrier options, but that will be much easier because all the ideas are already with us. So, okay. So maybe I will. Okay. So any questions before I
Sir,
continue?
could you talk about the correctness of the Brennan-Squartz algorithm, like how it is working actually? Like, how can we know that it will give us the results actually, the desired results? So,
So what you need to show is that if you were to do it the other way around, the error propagation will be more. So take the case of the put option. So for the put option, you want to make the upper diagonal 0 first.
yes.
So if you were to do it by the reverse method, lower diagonal 0 first, then the error will be more. That's the only thing to show.
So we are also using that that uh, diffusion strategy at its step at every step as well, right? So it placing the uh,
Bigger of the two.
yes. So taking the bigger of the two
Bigger.
and doing it continuously. So we are doing this and that both mixed. Okay. Okay. Fine. Fine. Fine.
So as I said, so it is basically using both the subroutines together. And Brennan-Schwarz, in addition, says that, okay, one of the subroutines should be started from a particular direction depending on the contract. So for a put, you make the upper diagonal 0. That's the better of the two alternative possibilities. And then you make the adjustment for each slice, each time slice at each step. Okay, so is that fine now?
Yes, sir.
So now let me continue with the barrier option calculation exercise. Now it will be much easier because all we need to understand is how the initial and boundary conditions are going to add up to the system, because the contract inside the barrier is already known to us. So let us think of a simple call option. So if the barrier is not breached, then it's a standard call option, and we already know how to price it. So the only place where we need to make adjustments would be where the barrier will be breached. So in that sense, most of the calculations are known calculations, but at each step we have to make check the possibility of the breach. So just to recap, barrier options are options that come alive or die when barriers are reached. Knock-in are options that comes alive when the barrier is reached, and knockout is the reverse. The option will die when the barrier is reached. So typically we know that the prices of these things are related to each other. So if we discuss one, the computation strategy for one of them, the other things can be easily figured out. We already know that option formulas for pricing standard barrier options have been developed. So we already do have analytical expressions. So we are already ahead in the game. By standard barrier, we mean single barrier, single one-sided barriers. So let's say single knock-in barrier option or single knockout barrier option. And it can be with or without rebate. Remember that earlier when we discussed barrier option, we said that if the option dies, sometimes a small rebate amount is paid to the holder rather than zero. So usually in the last semester, we made that discussion assuming that nothing is paid to the holder if the barrier is reached and the option dies. But in real life, there are sometimes some non-negative, some small positive amount is paid, which is called a rebate. And the symbol for that is capital R. So we have mentioned this earlier, somewhere, I don't recall, but in the formulation, if there is no rebate, you just put R equal to 0. So now, if I have a standard barrier option, so single knock-in barrier or single knockout barrier, let us start with without rebate. So capital R will be 0. So the calculations will be even easier. Or with a non-deferred rebate, so a rebate which is paid instantaneously, and constant volatility. So sigma is a constant. So my setting is standard option, constant volatility, only one barrier, that's the standard setup. Either I do not have a rebate, or if I have a rebate, that is paid instantaneously, non-deferred rebate. So these are the relevant formulae. So this A, B, C, D, E, F, they all actually involve the usual option pricing setup. This phi at evaluated at xi x1 or xi x1 minus xi sigma root t, etc. So if you look at these expressions are essentially using the components of the European call option formula in different combinations. In more complicated combinations to take care of the barrier possibilities, where some of these symbols are new, but some are already known. So X1, X2 are the normalized stock prices. X1 is stock price normalized to the strike. X2 is the stock price normalized by the barrier. And then I have 1 plus 2 mu sigma root t here, where this mu is this quantity. Small b is R minus Q. So interest rate minus dividend rate. Here I also have Y1, Y2 symbols of the same structure, but Y1 has a B, the reverse of X2 with B square. Z is this quantity, again log B by S sigma root t plus lambda sigma root t, and this lambda is this quantity. So these are actually results of detailed calculations. These detailed calculations are developed in these two references, and you finally get the exact analytical pricing expressions for the standard values. So we are not going to try and remember these expressions. So if we need them, we will just pick them up from somewhere, some reference. But our focus will be on how to translate it into a computational algorithm. So these are all the general expressions covering all the cases. So now let us focus on particular situations. So suppose our first situation is a knock-in barrier. So what I have is a down and in call, which means the option is a call option, but it will come alive when it breaches a barrier which is at capital B. So down and in call, barrier is at B, payoff is S minus X and 0, maximum of these two, X is the strike, if S is equal to B before capital T. So this is the condition. So if S becomes B sometime before capital T, sometime before maturity, I start from above. So it's a down and in. So I have to come down to make the contract alive. So I am starting from above. So if S reaches the level capital B at some point, then the contract becomes alive and I can use the call option. Otherwise, the option never comes alive and I will get capital R. That's the rebate. So how does the pricing expressions work? The value of this call option, down and in call option, with a strike which is above the barrier, which means the stock price, if it touches B, it will be below the barrier. So there are two different cases. Here the strike is above the barrier. That is given by C plus E with xi and eta equal to 1. So now look at C and E, these two expressions where this xi and eta appear in these components, this eta and the xi. So if I put xi and eta equal to 1, then C and D simplifies to some Black-Scholes-like expression, and that is the price of the call option down and in barrier option, where the strike is above the barrier. On the other hand, if the strike is below the barrier, X is less than B, then this expression has additional terms. It is more complicated. So it involves A, B, D, E, all four, again with xi and eta equal to 1. So A, B, D, and E. So obviously calculations will be algebraically quite lengthy, tedious, but not very complicated, because if you look at the expressions, that the nature of these expressions are very limited. They are essentially normal distribution functions and some exponentiation. Nothing else is involved. And similarly, you can also think of an up and in call. Up and in means the stock price starts from below and it has to breach the barrier at some point. So S is less than B to begin with, and it has to be equal before T, and then I get the call option, up and in call. For an up and in call, also two cases, I have these expressions. Now, because it is up and in, the eta is now -1 instead of 1. So when it is down and in, then eta is 1. When it is up and in, then eta is -1. When I am considering call options, then xi equals 1. And when we are considering put options, then xi equals -1. So you see, if you look at these expressions in pairs, it will be easier to understand how these things relate. So an up and in call and a down and in put are actually closely related. If you think about it in terms of the payoff, an up and in call and a down and in put are related. These two expressions are exactly the reverse of each other, because I am starting from different contracts, and the only difference here is xi is 1 for the call and -1 for the put. And similarly, if you look at the down and in call, then it will be the mirror of up and in put. Again, these expressions are reversed for each other. And of course, xi and eta both has to be -1 because it's put and it's up. So again, I don't need you to memorize these formulae. These are, of course, hard, but I want you to understand how different combinations are related to each other. For knock-in barrier options, calls and puts in terms of up and in and down and in, they are actually duals of each other. So their pricing formulae are related. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Now I can also think of a second family of knockout barrier options. Knockout means if I breach, the option dies. So it's the reverse condition, but again, in the knockout class, there should be similarities. So first, let us look at the down and out call option, where my stock price starts from above B, above the barrier B, but the option remains valid as long as the stock price stays above capital B, then it's a call option. But if I hit the barrier once, then I'm out, which means the contract dies and I only get the rebate. So down and out means I have to stay above the barrier for the option to remain alive. Now, the pricing expressions are given by these two things for the two cases with xi and eta both equal to 1. And similarly, when I talk about up and out, starting from below, then xi will be still 1 for call, eta will be -1 because it's up and out. For the down and out put, I will put xi equal to -1, and for up and out put, I will put both of them equal to -1. And again, there will be symmetry because down and out call and up and out put will be related, and up and out call and down and out put will be, up and out call and down and out put will be related. So these pair of expressions are reversed for each other, and this one with the fourth one are also reversed for each other. So these are from first principles. For these, you don't need to really evaluate the explicit expressions. As long as we understand the logic, we can figure out that this is going to be so. In fact, even last semester, we have seen some of these relationships, but of course, then we did not focus on explicit evaluation. Now we are actually talking about explicit evaluation through these forms. So are these okay? Okay, in the sense that is the intuition fine?
Yes, sir.
So for standard barriers, which are single barrier options, either knock in or knock out, I have a class of expressions given here. And by suitable choice of xi and eta, we can evaluate all these combinations analytically. Exactly. When the rebate is paid later at the end, so deferred rebate, in the case of the deferred rebate, knockout barrier option, either down and out and up and out, we can price the deferred rebate. So we can just discount the deferred rebate and add it to the price of the barrier without rebate. So handling a deferred rebate is like handling cash in the bank. So I can just discount it and adjust with the price. But the crucial simplification for this class of expressions is the constant volatility. Everywhere, this sigma nicely appears as a parameter in all these calculations. If sigma were a function of time, then we are in a very different situation altogether. If the volatility is not constant, there is no analytical solution. So the only solution possible then would be the numerical ones. And for numerical ones, we have to not only specify the PDEs, because the PDEs are the same as the call or the put option PDEs for barrier options. Not only those need to be specified, but we also have to specify the boundary conditions. Now the boundary conditions will be critical because I have barriers. So let us talk a little bit about those. So when we have constant volatility, we really don't need numericals because there are exact expressions available. But if my sigma is sigma t, non-constant, then I am out of the analytical expressions. I have to go back to numerical PDE solution And then we have to explicitly talk about the boundary conditions above and below. Okay, so these are the corresponding examples. Again, the idea is pretty much known, so I think we can go through them without any complication. So for up and out, so up and out call option, these ones. So I have to start from below and I have to stay below. If I breach the barrier, then the option dies. So for up and out, the payoff and the boundary conditions can be written like this. The payoff function, of course, is the call valuation, but only when S stays in the interval 0 to capital H, where capital H is the upper barrier level. So H is like high. So S must remain below H for the contract to be alive. What are the relevant boundary conditions? When the stock price goes to 0, when the stock price goes to 0, then we typically take VST equal to 0. Because if the stock price is very low, then there are very little chances of its going above the strike. So we take the value to be 0. Or we take the second derivatives to be 0, depending on which numerical boundary condition technique we are using, Dirichlet or Neumann. For the upper, because nothing above H is relevant, so when stock price approaches capital H from below, increases to capital H, then we approximate the value by the rebate amount. So it can be 0 if there is no rebate, or it can be a discounted value of the rebate if it is deferred. Okay. Am I making sense? So H is the upper barrier level. For the left boundary conditions, which is the lower values, I can either take Dirichlet or Neumann. So I can either take the restriction on the value of the contract, or I can take the restriction on the partial derivative, depending on which strategy I want to use. For the right boundary, the upper barrier, I have to set it equal to the rebate, otherwise I put it 0. So there is a single choice. So this is using our earlier boundary condition discussions. So let me just go back and revisit. So this was our boundary condition discussion. So Dirichlet boundary conditions were where I put the derivative values. We specify the derivative values explicitly at the boundary points. So that's what the V function, the value of the V function itself is specified. Or in the Neumann strategy, we look at the partial derivatives and set their value to be some known value, typically 0. So these were our two common boundary condition strategies, Dirichlet or Neumann. So we are illustrating them for our knockout barriers. So for up and out, I can choose the Dirichlet or Neumann on the left side. On the right side, there is a single condition. Is it clear? Is this clear? Can you all hear me?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, good. So basically, I am using the earlier boundary condition strategies, and the payoff calculation is known, so that is not a problem. Similarly, for an up and out put, a put option, the valuation will be the reverse, k minus s, maximum of 0 and k minus s, as long as we are staying below the barrier. And for the boundary condition, again, when the stock price is very low, then I can take the derivative to be 0. That is one strategy, the second partial. Or when the stock price is very low, I can take the value itself to be k minus s, which would be close to k. We know that for put option, when the stock price is low, that is good for us. So the VST will be k minus s. And of course, for the upper barrier, again, we have only one possibility. The value has to be equal to the rebate. Similarly, the other two. So these are very similar. Down and out. Down and out means the alive region is above some level. So let us call it low, the floor, lower value. So when I stay above L, I am alive. If I hit L from above, I die. So when I stay above L, it's a call option, no problem. Boundary condition, one condition will be at exactly L from above, and that has to be equal to R. And of course, for large stock prices, I can either take the Neumann or Dirichlet, depending on my choice. Okay, so did you get that? Hello? Did I lose connection?
Sir, there is some internet issues. I am not sure it is with me or it is with everyone.
There is what issue? I'm sorry, I lost connection. Am I audible again?
Yes, sir.
So it was a glitch on my side. Okay. All right. So let me go back to where I were. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we were talking about the possible choice of boundary conditions for the single barrier options. So it could be knockout or it could be knock in. Now the knockout cases we were discussing the up and out, up call and put, and down and out call and puts. So these are the knockout barriers. When I'm in the knock-in position, now we are going to use the parity equations. So when I'm in the knock-in barrier option position, we know that for knock-in barrier, we can use this argument that in plus out is equal to vanilla. So this is our parity formula for barrier options. The same type knock-in, knock-out will be equal to the vanilla version. For instance, if I have an up and in call option and a up and out call option, both calls, one in and one out, their sum will be the vanilla call option or the simple call option. Similarly for the put. So now that we have written out the computation strategy for all the knockout barrier options, I do not need to write the up and in or down and in option prices separately. All I need to do is mention these four equations. So to evaluate the up and in call option, I will simply calculate the up and out call, which we have already done, and subtract its price from the price of a vanilla call option. Similarly for the put. From the vanilla put, I subtract the price of up and out put option. For down and in, I also do subtract down and out call or put. And of course, if I understand the boundary conditions for the knockout options, like here, then understanding the boundary conditions for the knock-in options will be very, very easy. So we just work at it from the reverse direction. We just look at it from the reverse direction. The boundary conditions will be very straightforward. Okay, is that fine?
Yes, sir.
All right, so we will actually end our discussion with a combination option contract, the double barrier option. So a double barrier in particular, what we are looking at is a knockout double barrier option, which means my stock price has to stay within a range. So it will be knocked out if it crosses a H from below. It will also be knocked out if it crosses an L from above. So there is a ceiling and a floor, and I have to stay inside both of them. So a double barrier like that, the payoff will be like a call option for stock prices staying within this interval, open interval L and H. So I cannot touch any of the barriers. If I touch any of them, I die. And suppose the rebates are R1 and R2. The lower rebate is R1 at L and the upper rebate is R2 at H. Then my boundary conditions will also be exactly determined by the barriers. So the lower barrier will be R1 limit and the upper barrier will be R2 limit. And if any of them are 0, then it will be 0. Yeah, so exercise. All right. So that brings us to the end of the barrier option discussion. Any clarifications?
Sir, I had a general query.
General query. Okay.
In page 14. So
Page 14.
yes,
Page 14 of HITSA.
of this PD of this document.
Of this document.
Yes,
I
so
mean,
we are using so we are using the boundary condition as we are taking the boundary conditions as the the barriers and the 0 points, but to solve the PD we are kind of assuming the differentiability and the continuity at the same time. Okay, so if we take this situations as our boundary, uh, then a lot of differentiability and the continuity will not hold, and that will create a lot of problems. So, and I mean, because we are different equations are actually working because there is differentiability and continuity and stuff like that. But when so at the barrier it is suddenly becoming 0 and there is this discontinuity. Yes, so I don't think that this barriers will actually work in that sense.
no, they actually work. Because what you need to remember is that I am only going to consider all the differential operators or difference operator in the interior of the intervals. I cannot touch the barriers.
But the values are actually influencing it, and
The
because
values
the
are
values
influencing it. So in terms of value discontinuity, you are right. Because when
the
I
error
am
will be like enormous errors will be there because we cannot actually approximate it using delta x square or something like that, because we do not know that what is actually happening at the discontinuity. It won't be like delta x square only.
no, we know exactly how much difference is there. See, it is not that bad because our value function is known. I know that my value function is exactly this. Say for a call option, I know the value function is exactly this. The only possible point of discontinuity is here.
Yes.
And I know exactly how much.
Yes.
So it is not a question of not knowing the magnitude. So
Okay,
when I evaluate my value function, in the
we'll
input,
change the magnitude only.
we change
Right,
only
sir.
the magnitude. And
Okay.
I know exactly by how much. So there is no unknown error coming in.
Okay, okay. Now I get it. Okay, fine.
See, all the derivative contract, the basic functions are typically the call or the put function. And then you put other conditions on top of them to define a more complicated arrangement. So when you break it down in the conditional, in the grid, then the elementary function evaluation is explicit. I know that a function will either look like this or it's reverse for a put. So I know I am making magnitude errors on the margins, but I also know exactly how much error there is, how much
Yes,
difference is
yes.
there. So it is not that bad. And for derivative, of course, I will have to stay inside. So I will have to use some kind of Neumann type boundary conditions. There are approximations involved there, but those approximations are same as in any other computational algorithm where I make those assumptions.
All right. That makes sense.
So you see, computational algorithms are always approximations. But that's where the beauty lies, that I have to figure out, having the same computational power, can I reach a better error approximation or a higher order of approximation. That's the beauty. So it is a little bit of playing around. And we have seen all those things like implicit, explicit, Crank-Nicholson, different kind of strategies using the same amount of power, or the Dirichlet or Neumann boundary conditions. One on the actual value, the other on the derivatives. But when would one be more helpful than the other? So these are choices we make all the time.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. But of course, all these points are still very notional, very abstract in nature. But as soon as we get into computations, which I'm going to talk about now, you can see the course page now.
Yes.
So we are at the end of chapter 4. And these are the exercises that I want you to do from chapter 4. There are 3 case studies. CS are case studies. If you go to the exercise of chapter 4, you will see that first there are some theoretical problems and then there are case studies. This is chapter 3, correct? Which page should I go to? I think somewhere in this region. So I think somewhere the exercises start. This is problem 1. Where am I starting? Yeah. So this is page 164. So these are the theoretical problems first. Actually, the formatting is unhappy. Some of the pictures from earlier discussion are coming in between. But these are the theoretical problems first. So I want you to do the first 2 of them and the 4th one. And then there are some case studies. Case studies are the numerical exercises. And once you start doing these, whatever points we were making in our discussion, they will make more sense. where these choices of strategies come into play, how they impact our final solution, etc. Okay, so chapter 4, these are the exercises, and I also uploaded some computing resource sites. Yesterday I did some before, but yesterday I added to them. So these are now at the top of my posts. The first one is from Rutgers. So it's a compilation of many links. It's a page with many links, and some of the links which I found from other places and also from this place, which I thought are more to the point for our course, I have put them here. This first, second, and the fourth one. The third one is, of course, the high frequency data, which we are not discussing right now, but the first, second, and fourth are very good computing resources for many finite difference kind of techniques and simulation techniques. So all of you, I would definitely ask you to go to these sites, start looking at the codes, and when you are solving these case studies, and also when you are doing these extra problems. I have this extra problem attachment here also. From chapter 3, there were some problems. Chapter 6 also, there will be more problems. So start working on these problems. They will require you to do actual computation algorithm writing, and there these sites would be helpful because, of course, the pieces there are written by professionals or experts, and they have good efficiency. So any other questions? We will stop here today, end of chapter 4. Next week, we are going to start on chapter 5. So before I exit, so this is the chapter 5 setting, which we will start next week. And the setting for chapter 5 is the Levy process. So far, we have been working with smooth processes, but now we will explicitly talk about modeling the jump processes. And our generic model will be the Barndorf, Nielsen, Shepard, and the CGMY models. So most of the discussions in chapter 5 will be done using the CGMY, but one can definitely do similar things with the variance gamma also. So brush up on the CGMY process definition from chapter 1. This is section 1.2.8. Brush up on your Levy process definition. This would be critical because all through the chapter, this representation will be used again and again. This is section 1.1.8. So 1.1.8 for Levy and 1.2.8 for CGMY. Definitely you should brush up. Using them, we will be talking about this kind of structures. But that's next week, so you have time to, 1, start doing the exercises from chapter 4 and the previous chapters, and 2, brush up on this chapter 1 theory, which we will be now using in our computational setup. Okay.